Hello everyone, and welcome to Kerbal Space Program. And if you don't think this is a good fit for the channel, don't worry, I'm gonna explain why as we get there. Now, if you're seeing this video, I'm already away on vacation, and I have to record all of this week's videos in advance, so I kinda wanted to do something different and fun. Now, before we get started, I'm gonna give a little bit of a rundown on what we're doing in this video, and why I'm making this video. So to start with, you can see that little flag right there represents us at the Kerbal Space Center, and our goal is going to be the moon. Part of what I find so amazing about this game is how it makes the act of space travel itself feel so monumentally rewarding. Where in other games you kind of zip around between planets and alien civilizations like it's nothing, in this, there's no little green men out there, except for our little green men. It just, by having you actually do the engineering, the math, the planning, the trial and error, it gives you an appreciation for just getting there. To the point where you can land on this little dead rock in the middle of space and just be completely awestruck, not just by the view, but by your own accomplishment. And that's how I felt in June of 2012, 10 years ago, when I first landed on the moon. But the cool thing about this was that I didn't have any idea how to land somewhere in particular, but while I was coming down, I thought I spotted something in the distance. And that something is what we're going to be heading towards today. Of course, before we can go to the moon, we'll have to design a craft capable of doing so first. The other half of this game is engineering, after all. And I never like sending my Kerbals into space alone. So we're going to be sending up 3 Kerbinauts, the original cast, Bill, Jebediah, and Bob. And I'll be honest, I had gotten to the point years ago where even though it felt like such an amazing achievement the first time, I could get to the moon in my sleep. I mean, back in the day, I was going to the moons of Jewel, I was going to Duna, I was doing all kinds of stuff, building space stations and docking. But I'm really rusty, and this game has changed a lot since I last played, so I'm going to be going from memory, and worst of all, I'm going to be recalling some of the numbers from memory. So first things first, we're going to want a parachute, of course. And we definitely do not want to forget a heat shield for when we re-enter Kerbin's atmosphere. Assuming we do make it back. Now, of course, when designing a rocket, we're essentially working backwards, starting with our final stage, which is basically the lander, and working down to our first stage, which will be the launch stage. And we want to make sure that each one is equipped with enough delta V to accomplish its objective, and the one below it has enough to carry it to its objective. So we're going to start out with our landing stage, and what we're going to do here is just a big old fuel tank. Wow, they've really added a lot of parts, and they look so different. From what I understand, they not only added a bunch, but also retextured a lot, and we can change the textures as well. I always usually like to go with one of these guys. Can we change the texture to... Yeah, let's go with that. I like the default one. And now we need an engine. Something that has a... I forget, do we want a higher or a lower specific impulse? That I think is going to be too big. I keep forgetting that now they do have something that's like Kerbal Engineer Redux built into the game, and so we can see all of our delta V measurements. So that's extremely useful because I'm running vanilla right now. This one looks right. So we'll place you there. And... oh, now we can decide if they're shielded or not. We can see all of these different values to calculate what we'll have at a given moment during the trip. So we definitely don't want to be at sea level. We want to be in orbit around the moon. And that means we will have 2,557 meters per second of delta V, which should be more than enough to land this thing and return to Kerbin. So what are some things we're going to need for this trip? This is Sandbox, it's just a land and return, so we don't have to worry about all this science stuff. But we are going to need, well, we're probably going to want some legs, right? Those are good. We'll put on 3 of those. Make sure we leave plenty of room for the ladder, if we can fit one. And make sure we leave room so that the engine doesn't strike the ground when we land, because we are going to hit with a little bit of force and we don't want to depress so much that we strike the engine. Let's also place some lights. We're definitely going to go for a day landing. It makes everything so much easier. But we'll, at least at night, because we are going to be staying the night, it wouldn't be a video on this channel if we didn't. We're going to want to be able to see at least the area immediately around us. And these are the ones that have the widest area. Next, let's place our ladder. Make sure that goes down. That goes plenty far down. We can actually bring this up a fair bit. The question is, how do we get down there? That's the annoying thing about these new decouplers. I guess if we put you here and that goes down, that should be okay, right? Maybe bring you a little bit farther down. There we go. That should be okay, right? We can also lose some weight by getting rid of our monopropellant. We don't need any of that because we're not going to be using RCS during this trip. However, we do need some power. I usually like to take 2 of these batteries, just stick them on the side here. For prettiness sake, we'll dip them in a little bit. I know part clipping, but whatever. It's for the visuals. And we're going to want to add an antenna. That really is just for RP purposes, since we're not going to be actually doing anything as far as science goes. But I have my reasons, and I'll explain that more once we're up there. And with 2,487 meters per second delta V remaining, that looks perfectly fine to me. So let's retract these legs, retract these ladders, and to me that looks like a perfectly fine landing and return stage. Those of you in the KSP community, or even if you're just into spaceflight in general, are probably yelling at me right now. Do it Apollo style! And here's the thing. I find Apollo style landings as cool as the next guy, right? I love the idea of the lander comes down, comes back up, and has to rendezvous with the orbiter, and that's how they get back. But here's the thing. I hate the idea of sending 3 Kerbals off to a foreign body, and only 2 of them get to walk on it. Anytime I send my Kerbals somewhere, if you haven't been there before, you get to walk on that thing, even if it goes completely against the pragmatism of the mission. So that's that. But now it's time to build what I believe would be called our injection stage. This is the stage that's going to carry us from Kerbin orbit over to the moon. And so we want the stage to have a little bit more thrust, and we want it to have about, I would say, maybe 1,500 meters per second delta V. Maybe we'll even go for 2,000, because I would like for it to be able to circularize with the moon. Okay, yeah, so we right-click, and we can see their ISP, and that's 290 at sea level and 310 in a vacuum, meaning it gets more efficient in a vacuum, at least if I remember correctly. Next we need to build our launch stage, and this is going to be the heaviest and most challenging. Because remember, it has to take everything we've built on top of it and overcome Kerbin's gravity and atmosphere. So here it really matters, what really matters is going to be our thrust-to-weight ratio. We're going to want it to be a decent amount over 1, or it won't even lift off the ground, and we want to do so in a timely fashion as well. Here's our mainsail. Oops. And what does that get us? Yep, that looks good. A thrust-to-weight ratio of 8. And it has 2,467 meters per second of delta V. We're not even going to need boosters at this rate. Another tank on top of that. Because if we have that much extra thrust to weight, I'm definitely... Oh, wait, no. I have almost made a grave error here. We're still set to the conditions of the vacuum around the moon. Yeah, now that is considerably going to be lower, I think. Yeah, now we have a 1.22 thrust-to-weight ratio, which should be fine, but I'm not really happy about that delta V. We want this launch stage to have about 3,000 meters per second delta V. So what I'm going to do is I am actually going to add this next tank. And we're going to have some boosters to hopefully help carry us up in the early stages. And now, I think the creepy craft is ready to fly. You can see on the bottom right, we'll be launching with a thrust to weight of 1.31, meaning it should get off the ground and then some. And between the boosters and the main stage, we should have just over 3,000 meters per second of delta V, which should provide enough to get us into orbit. Now here we are on the launch pad, and my oh my, has the mountain range behind the Kerbal Space Center changed a lot. But I'm not here to talk about that. I am here to talk about how Bill, Jebediah, and Bob are getting ready to be the first Kerbals on the moon. I remember how excited I was repeatedly trying and failing to do this 10 years ago. And we want to make it so that the moon, relative to the KSC, is just over the horizon. Because once we get around that bend, we're going to want to be firing straight forward, and that will put us... I mean, it seems intuitive, you want to fire straight at the moon, but in reality, our arc will be going more this way, where we'll intercept it. And now, as we prepare for launch, the crew nervously look around at each other inside this riveted metal death trap. You guys ready to make history? Because I am, and I'm also ready to talk about why space is unbelievably spooky. So we'll turn on our SAS, throttle up, and hope this works. And not quite the thrust to weight I would have liked. I think this maybe could have used more boosters. But nevertheless, we are getting started, and once we reach 1 kilometer, we're going to want to start our gravity turn gradually. So as we go, we're going to want to slowly but surely, I think I'm actually a little behind, turn over horizontally. Because now that we're out of the densest parts of the atmosphere, especially once we hit 36 kilometers, we'll be more or less unbound by the atmosphere itself, and it's going to be all about getting that speed towards the moon. We don't even have to worry about circularizing our orbit with Kerbin, because by the time we get up there, we'll already be at an opportune angle to shoot straight for the moon. Now we get up here. The stars become so apparent, and the ground, what was once that huge Kerbal Space Center, now receding, looking like, well, not even a Lego model below us. But now we get up here, we're just shy of orbit, but that's alright, we've got plenty in our injection stage. And now we just kind of have to wait for the moon to come up over the horizon. Actually, we probably don't even have to wait, we're so close that we can probably just start burning right now. That thrust to weight is a little bit light, though. We may have to go for another pass. Yep, I think that'll do just fine. And now you'll see here we have our intercept with the moon, and we'll want to bring that periaps down as low as we possibly can. Yep, I think we might even be getting a second intercept there. But we just want to bring that down. I usually like to bring it down to less than 100 kilometers. And now, on our current trajectory, we will pass within 57 kilometers of the surface of the moon. And as we go back, we can see the sun lighting the area we're coming from, and the shadowy darkness falling on the opposite side of the planet, all in one view. Sitting in the cockpit, with your crewmates, knowing that this is your life for the next couple of days, really. And something that's more exclusive to this game rather than real spaceflight, I've never liked the way the shadows fall over their faces. The space madness seems like it could be setting in any time now. We are now 4 hours and 47 minutes into our flight, just about to make contact with the moon's sphere of influence, and it's at this time that I want to take a look back. That's where we came from. That's what we spent so much effort to overcome, and in real life, that's where you've spent your entire life. Imagine seeing it from this distance and realizing just how unfathomably far away you are. Like, if I wanted to leave right now, there is nothing I can independently do to accomplish that. I imagine being in space, looking down on Earth, must be that feeling times about 1,000,000,000,000. Because in a situation like this, you are entirely dependent on other people's math, on other people's engineering, on everything going right to ever get back to that place that you took for granted ever again. I don't know, there's just nothing like seeing firsthand our place in space to fill me with this existential horror at how fragile this whole thing is. It makes me think of us like the last leaf on a big tree in the middle of a huge blizzard. Like, our safety is in no way assured, that our very existence is only by random chance, and how that can be wiped out by something totally beyond our control at any time. But I believe we should only be about a minute out from our encounter with the moon, and from there we'll have to start planning our circularization before we land. And there goes our nav ball. And you're happy to have finally reached the moon, huh? Actually, wait, which one are you? Oh, we're actually all seated in a line. Wait, actually, did this cockpit get a redesign at some point? I could swear it used to be 2 in the front and 1 in the back. Well, anyway, I guess having company kind of takes the edge off, doesn't it? Which is why I never liked the idea of Mr. Collins hanging out in the orbiter all alone. And it's why I can't bring myself to do the same to my Kerbals. And the time has come where we're going to turn around and circularize our orbit. And I'm now realizing that I have not placed any solar panels on this craft. And so the only electricity we get is going to be generated by our engines. Luckily I brought those batteries, otherwise we might have a real problem. So let's circularize to the extent that we can, and try to bring this to within 100 kilometers. I don't want to drop us too much. That looks good. 57, 91, not exactly circular, but good enough for our purposes. Now the question is, which of these craters is it above? I think it's this middle one, which means only a minor adjustment to our inclination should be necessary to get where we're going. But here's the other scary thing, and it's something that I mentioned first in the VAB, but now I'm going to explain why. So we have this antenna, which means that as long as we have line of sight with Kerbin, we have communications with the outside world. Or with the world. We are the outside world. But when we go around the back, that'll be completely blocked by the moon, meaning that once we head around the dark side, we're not going to have any communications at all. We're totally on our own. And for the purposes of gameplay right now, that doesn't really matter. But that just creeps me out so much. The idea of astronauts passing behind the moon and those on the ground not knowing their condition until they come out on the other side. I mean, what would the assumption be if they just never did? So now we get to go into the dark, completely alone. Now remember, I used to play this game a lot normally, for the space exploration, not for the creepiness, but this is the part that always weirded me out a little. Because when you pass by, I always think of a line from the underappreciated, not good, but underappreciated movie, Apollo 18, in which the character who is left up in the orbiter looks out and he remarks, "It's a strange feeling on the dark side, where every so often you look out this window and feel like something might be staring back. We really are going into an unknown world, and it's when that world is dark to us that you really start to feel that. Rise and shine, relief at last, and now is when we can start planning what we want to do here. So at first, we're going to want to lower our orbit just so we can scout. Now, luckily, we really overbuilt this injection stage, so we have enough fuel to do pretty much whatever we want. We can even start on our descent with this stage if we want to. So I now have absolute confidence that this mission will succeed, so long as we don't strike the engine into the ground and render this craft inoperable. So I'm going to lower our periaps to be much lower. 20 kilometers should about do it. Below that, I don't think we can time warp as fast. And as we come down, I'm going to try and make visual contact with the place we're going. But before we do that, we want to get in between our periapsis and our apoapsis, and we're going to want to burn north just a little bit, because our target is on the top of this crater, and we need to be a little bit higher than this. So let's just pull up our orbital belt just a little bit. Try and line up the different sides so I know I'm seeing things correctly. And that should just about get us where we're going. Every meter closer we get is the closest we've been. And we're going to get as low as about 20 kilometers. That's one of my favorite parts of space travel, is all the times you can look up and see something, especially the moon, and later on Minmus. And you get such a rewarding feeling when you finally get this view. This game makes me feel sometimes like a dog who's using increasingly advanced and more convoluted methods to get closer and closer to a ball that it wants. Like the only thing that matters is to reduce the distance between me and the object of my desire. Now here we are, riding along the upper lip of this crater. But I still can't see the target. Now granted, at this distance, with all these wonderful new textures, it feels like we're pretty close, but that is still quite a distance. So maybe it makes sense that I wouldn't be able to see it yet? I'm not sure. It's been so long since I visited. But look at that vast expanse. From here, you really get to appreciate that this crater, it's not just texture. It's a valley surrounded by huge mountains. Perspective is such a crazy thing, especially when it comes to space travel. But still no sign of my target. Wait, I think that's it. I think it just popped in down there. Okay, we are on perfectly the right track. I think our goal, and we'll make a note of where exactly we are. Okay, it's that little dip right there. Right in the middle, right by this crater. And as we go, comms out one more time, passing around the dark side. Now we have the sun to our front, which gives us a little bit more of a view of the surface below. And that's the thing about space travel, and in particular the moon. This dead, barren surface, it looks so foreboding, but at the same time so beautiful. And it's something that we all get to see, but just not like this. For as creepy as it is, I just love watching this go by. Although we are currently at 20 kilometers or below, so anything that might want to look back now has a front row seat. This is the kind of feeling that you just don't get from sci-fi media where space travel is no big deal. When you actually had to think about the orbital mechanics, when you had to put the craft together, you really gain an appreciation for just what it is you're doing. And as the sun sets below the horizon, we have nothing to do but wait for our chance to land. Okay, the time has come, and we are now fast approaching our objective. Now, I think we have enough thrust to weight that we should be able to pretty quickly kill our velocity and come down pretty much straight above it. So I think we're going to want to burn just a little bit to the south, just to put us on a trajectory that brings us a little bit closer. That should be plenty. And remember, we want to land in this crater right here. Now, hopefully it's not too late. We'll start killing that lateral velocity. That looks good, and we are no longer in a stable orbit. At this point, we will collide with the surface of the moon, if left to our own devices. And that looks pretty good. That looks like a good place to start. And we'll want to keep ourselves facing retrograde for as much time as possible. We're also going to have to remember to ditch this injection stage. It's already carried us far farther than we really needed it to. But it actually looks like we're coming up kind of short. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend our reach a little bit by burning upwards and a little bit in the opposite direction. And hopefully we'll come sailing down fairly near to it. We're fairly close enough to make the trip by EVA, but I want to try and land as close as possible. So let's keep ourselves going just a little bit. We've still got some lateral velocity to carry us. We just need to arrest our rate of descent, maybe even gain a little bit of altitude. And I don't mind wasting this fuel because, well, the stage was never supposed to be doing this anyway. Kill off all the rest of our lateral velocity with whatever's left in the tank. Boop, boop, boop. Come on, we're so close. Ah, this is such an accurate landing so far. Come on, and that's it for that stage. And now we finally deploy the lander. And we're heading straight down, or we're about to be. And because it's a little bit dark, and we have plenty of power, let's go ahead and turn on our lights. That is only the lights for the cabin. I want my exterior lights. Now we'll want to extend our legs and switch to our radar altimeter so that we gain an accurate idea of how long we have until we reach the ground and start killing off some of that vertical velocity. Actually, I can set Jeb to keep us in retrograde, and that should work just fine. Oh, look at that. Here it comes. There's the sound of our previous stage hitting the ground, and whoa, we actually need to burn off a lot more quickly than I thought. I really got to pay attention here, because now we have to finesse this, and preferably I want to land at less than 10 meters per second. It's that balance between not coming down too fast, but not so boringly slow either. And there it is, landing right beside the lunar arch. 17-year-old me would have been so stoked on this. But it's so hard to land in the shadow. Oop. Burn. Oh, it was a little bit of a hard landing, and we're on a slope. But we managed to kill a few meters per second right at the last minute, and I believe we landed at about 6 or 7 meters per second, which is good enough for me. The question is this going to maintain its orientation? This is actually sliding a fair bit, more than I think it should. Alright, I think I'm going to have to go for another attempt at parking. Oops. Get my orientation right. Burn a little bit in this direction. And hopefully that'll be level enough that we can go for a better landing. This is why I always plan to have a lot of extra fuel in the lander in case I have to do a reorientation like this. And that's a much smoother landing on a much smoother surface. And here we are. Now we'll just deploy our ladders. We're not going to want to keep the lights on while we do this, because I don't want to run out of battery. But this is our final spot on the moon, and my little guys, they, well, there's a smile, but I was going to say, they look a little bit nervous in the presence of this thing. And now that day is broken, it is time for us to take our first steps onto the surface. Why is EVA currently unavailable? Oh, we're still time warping. Okay. And Jebediah, as pilot, you get to take the first small steps for you. Or you could fall flat on your back. That's that's very Kerbal of you, Jebediah. And look at him. He is so excited about this. I was too the first time I landed. But once we get over here, I'll start talking about what my experience is with this arch in particular. And now that the gang's all here on the surface, Jeb, would you please do the honors of planting the flag? I remember being so excited waiting for the EVA update to come out, and the game has come so far since then. You alright? You look like you know something we don't, and now you're really trying to keep it a secret. Alright, well, let's go ahead and plant the lower visor. Huh, when did they add that? That is so cool. But no time for that. The crew of the Creepy Craft can now dub this Creepy Crater Arch. And they will plaque this, abandon all nope ye who enters here. Okay. Well, that said, let's go take a look at this thing. Look at this vast ocean of regolith in front of us. A big part of the horror of space is just how empty it is, and what an aberration we are. But also, there's the fear of what could potentially be discovered in that, and when it comes to kind of brainstorming ideas for creepy things to find in space, I find that less is often more. And that's why I'm so intrigued by these arches. Why would something like this form? I realize that to a lot of you this probably doesn't mean much, but to kind of explain my mindset when it comes to the Easter eggs that are hidden throughout the solar system in this game, and yes, finding these Easter eggs is literally a task as large as searching a solar system, you have to understand what my experience with discovering this for the first time was like. When I was landing my first craft, I was so excited that I had finally learned the basics of orbital mechanics and was able to actually get something to land on the moon. I didn't even care about the fact that it couldn't return because I had smashed the legs. All I cared about was, wow, I did it! I got here! And it was only then that I looked around and saw all of this that I started to feel more than a little bit small and a kind of alone that I hadn't really experienced before, that I couldn't have really experienced before. But on my way down, I was surprised when I saw what looked like just a couple of flickering pixels in this area. And I noticed that it wasn't just a graphical aberration, that I actually saw it every time on every subsequent moon landing that I sent. Of course, I didn't have the ability to investigate this directly, I just didn't have the skill to plan where I wanted to land at that time. And so eventually I installed a bunch of mods, because you couldn't do it in vanilla at the time, and I put together an unmanned rover. And the plan was that I would spend hours, and wherever I was able to land that thing, I would drive across the surface to get here, and I actually still have that video clip around. I had marked down basically where I thought I had seen these splashes, and imagine my surprise when I came up on it and actually saw this thing sitting on top of this crater. Now, the landscape itself has changed considerably since then, but the idea still stands. This is a huge landmark in the middle of just nothing. And coming upon this was so bizarre. Look how it just dwarfs my craft. Look how it just dwarfs me. I don't know if at 1440p you can even see me standing on top like this, but my point is, once you come to appreciate the realism of this game's portrayal of space travel and adjust your expectations accordingly, it is so much more unnerving than other games when you find something that shouldn't be here. Especially given the cosmic scale of the needle in a haystack nature of finding these things. And it just makes your imagination run wild, because this solar system, you know by this point, it's realistically dead. So what would cause something like this to come to be here? Is it just a weird geological formation, or something more? There were a lot of theories on this back in the day. I even read one interesting theory that because it runs along the ridge of this mountain, that these may be exposed vertebrae of some giant creature that all the dust has settled on top of, that these are actually bones. And remember, although there are equally or even more difficult to find Easter eggs out there, some of them are, whoops, I hope I can regain control of this Kerbal before we hit the ground. You're going to have to enable your thrusters there. Yep. Nice save. It's worth noting, there are things on every body in the game. I've really been struggling to put my thoughts into words in this video, but I think what I'm getting at is that this is an exploration game in a way that's not like something like Subnautica, where the goal is to find things. It's an exploration game in which your goal is to get places, and occasionally, if things go just right, you might find something, and you know there shouldn't really be anything to find, and the things that you do find make you wonder just what else is out there, and what your place in this universe really is. Kind of like real space travel. You guys, I absolutely cannot wait to see what they do with the Easter eggs in KSP 2. But we've had a lot of fun here, but now it's time to pack it up and leave. And as Bob is the last person to board, it's time for us to go ahead and retract our ladders. Let's check on our battery. Still doing perfectly well. It's actually full. And it's time for us to return to our... Can I see it at this angle? There we go. It's time for us to return to our beautiful Kerbin. So we will engage our SAS, throttle up, and all at once take off. And as we don't have any atmosphere to worry about, we can go horizontal right away, say goodbye to the lunar arch in all its creepy awesome glory, and speed off. Goodbye, Moon. Leaving you is always bittersweet. But it's time to go home, and on this save, I'm sure these Kerbals will come back. Whenever I play this game, I always kind of like to RP, like, little narratives for individual Kerbals. For example, a lot of craft in this game, or cockpits, only allow you to have 3 Kerbals. But there's 4 orange suits, Jeb, Bill, Bob, and later they added Valentina. And so, whenever I play these saves, I always like to kind of imagine a rivalry between Jeb and Valentina, where whenever one of them does something, the next time the other person will be the first to do it. So for example, if Jeb is the first to land on the moon, Valentina will land on Minmus, and then he'll one-up her with landing on Duna, and so on and so on. And there we go, passing over the dark side for the last time. And I've never been quite clear on how ejection angles work exactly, but I know the rule of thumb for this is that once you're directly between the moon and Kerbin, that's when you can begin your prograde burn. So let's throttle up, still got tons and tons of Delta V left. And we're going to want to get as close of a return trajectory as possible. We shouldn't have to burn again at all. I usually, on a return from the moon, try to bring it down to about 30 kilometers. And with that, well, physics will do the rest. We're just along for the ride now. If you'll join me for one last edition of What Astronauts Must Have Been Thinking, I wonder if, while sitting on the moon's surface, they ever just thought to themselves, like had a moment of clarity and said, what have I gotten myself into? Just keeping an eye on our time warp so that we don't accidentally warp right on through the atmosphere, which can happen, because physics are disabled when you're doing time warp. And now we are going to be passing... actually, how close are we going to get to the Kerbal Space Center? Where are we on the map right now? We're actually... we're going to come in pretty close. We're going to overshoot it, I think, but... this is a lot closer than I usually get. We're definitely going to see it pass under us while we're in atmosphere, which is pretty exciting. Maybe we can wave. Yep, we are now in atmosphere. I just hope we don't undershoot it and come down in the mountains. Yep. And now we're starting to light up, so let's detach from our lander stage. Goodbye, lander. You served us well. Turn off our SAS. And physics will do the rest. You can see that heat shield is ablating, but it should be more than sufficient to carry us down to home, and with any luck, we'll land on or near our home continent. Let's just turn on our fizz warp so that we get down faster. Oh, this is so cool. Look at the Kerbals rocking back and forth in their seats. We're time warping, but I imagine that's what they'd actually be going through right about now. Slowing down, and oh, we are going to land so close. We're currently only 20 kilometers above the Kerbal Space Center, and we are starting to come into more of a downward trajectory. Oh, this is so neat. Can we land in the water? No, I think we're going to come up just shy. Oh, we're going to get a car ride back home. That is so cool. That is... Somebody could definitely do the math. I'm sure there's a technique to this, but I have never landed this close from a return from the moon. But it's about this time. We're probably going to want to deploy our chute. Might want to remember to do that. Wouldn't want to forget that. If something were to go wrong, the Kerbals can now individually bail out and use their own parachutes, but I may not have enough time to get them all, since I have to do each of them manually one at a time. Imagine, after all that, to be able to see buildings in your own view. After all this time, it must feel almost like a dream, to be able to see familiar structures. No, I want the other window. We can't quite see what's out there just yet. And now we should be able to look out that window, and if we just dip a little bit using the SAS... There it is. Ah, how good this must feel to watch the ground slowly rising up into view. There's no place like home. And here we are. And we have made it. Now all that's left to do is sit around eating snacks and wait for our ride to get here, which shouldn't be all that long from now if we're at all competent. I hope we brought a lot of snacks. And we have returned, becoming the first Kerbals to walk on the moon, and the first to experience the existential terror and absolute loneliness that must come with that. I don't know if I did a very good job of explaining why this is creepy to me. I feel like I rambled a lot, and I'm sure I'm going to be cutting a lot of the things that I said during the trip, because a lot of it is probably really redundant, but I really hope that at least a few of you understood what I mean by this. And if you liked this video, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more creepy and comfy content. If you have any ideas for other videos you think I should do, the best place to suggest that will be at the Discord, which I will link in the description. If you want to get this game for yourself, I will link that on Steam in the description. And as always, I will see you in the next one.